class. So he was talking about standardized tests and GPA and all this stuff. And he was really, talk about a rant. I mean, he was sweating. He was like really getting into it. And he said that he had a story about a kid in Texas who lived, I guess, in what they call the Valley. I wasn't aware of this, but he pointed out that the student would be like even crossing the border to go into high school. Like he was taking like a 4-hour trip every day because he wanted to play high school football at a certain high school. And then I think he was applying to go to this college, and the professor was advocating for him, and someone was like, well, what's his GPA? And he's like, this kid is going 4 hours round trip, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, because he wants to go to this school. And you want to know what his GPA is? You don't want that kid in your college? You don't think that he's going to like do something amazing one day? I don't care about his GPA. He's like, I don't care. And then he did.
Yeah. And so this is your first year as a school principal?
That's right. I've been an assistant principal in DPS for 8 years. But this is my first 2 months as a principal.
Oh my God. Yeah. I had the pleasure of being a Richie intern with you.
Yeah.
8 or 9 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah, and we both came from the high school world. You stayed in the high school world. I did a little bit of movement around elementary, middle, high.
Yep.
You actually helped me connect back with high school. And
briefly.
Then briefly for 2 years, and
Yeah.
then I came back to CMS.
Yeah.
So our journeys have been a little bit different, but I have always really, really loved you and appreciate you, and you're amazing.
Likewise, I would say the same for you. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. So now I wonder if you could just walk me and everybody listening to a little bit to your leadership story. I've known you for obviously almost 9 years, but I know that your journey as an educator goes way back. So
yeah. Well, my leadership story is grounded in being a DPS parent. So I was, my kids were starting at Denison Montessori in Southwest Denver, not far from here. And that was in 2000. So I knew that I wanted my kids to go to a Montessori school. And at that time, that was the one that you could go to. We didn't have Montessori at Lincoln at that point. And it was a school that just had a really amazing reputation. And when I became more and more involved at Denison as a parent, I really started to think more about education as my own path, my own trajectory. So as a mom of 4 kids who were the first 3 born pretty close together, I had my twins when my older son was 2, and then another baby when my twins were 4 and my oldest was 6. So I did some freelance work for magazines and some other side hustles because I'm a pretty hard worker to make some cash. But for the most part, I was a parent and I was getting my kids to school and becoming really involved at Denison. I always like to think about one of the first times I met Susana Cordova, our former superintendent, is we were both parents at Denison and we were planning the silent auction together. And it was, she wasn't superintendent then, she had a different job, but our kids went to school there and we connected. And it was just something about the culture of the school that made me want to be involved in education. And my dad was a teacher, and so that also resonated with me. But when my kids would come home and talk to me about what they did at school that day and what they had learned, I thought, I want to do that. I want to have that same impact. And I did briefly think about elementary school and Montessori specifically. I'm a huge Montessori fan, but I was closer with my undergraduate to being qualified to teach secondary English. So I went back to school. And at that point, my youngest was 2, and I put him in the Auraria campus preschool. So we would both commute down to Auraria together. And I would go to my classes at CU Denver. And then I started looking for jobs. My first job in DPS was in January of 2007. I was a long-term sub at Grant Middle School.
What?
Yeah. And actually, there's a decent side story to this about leadership, because if leadership is about being vulnerable and letting people know that you've had some real fails along the way and that you can empathize with what it's like to be a new teacher, I'm ready to share that.
Yes.
So Greta Martinez, if I can use another name drop of DPS fame, was the principal at the time. And she went on to do a lot of big things in DPS.
Yes.
Maybe even still, she's always pulling out of retirement. And Amy Bringedall was the assistant principal. She's a principal at North now. And I was with a group of students in a 7th grade English class, and I was so focused on the one table of students that was really picking up what I was throwing down. Like they were like thinking about metaphors, and I was just thinking, oh, this is going so great. And Greta comes up to the room where I'm teaching, the 2nd floor, and she's like, you're with these kids here, and those boys over there are throwing your books out the window.
Oh, gosh.
And they're falling down by her office.
Oh my God.
So
wait, Greta was the principal?
Yeah, she was the principal. Yeah, I was so mortified. But I will say that my classroom management by the end of that semester was just on point. And so then in August of 2007, I got my job at Kennedy High School. And teaching high school, I really did find my place. I think that I really connected with my students. And teaching at Kennedy in particular, again, goes back to what I was talking about of being a DPS parent. I felt like part of how I could really dedicate myself to my students and find a way to be the teacher that I wanted my kids to have was to be close to where my kids were at school. So I actually drew a little circle around Denison and kind of looked on the map, and I thought, well, I'm going to apply to Kennedy. I'm going to apply to Lincoln. I thought about Koonsmiller. I mean, anybody who had openings that were in Southwest Denver, because I wanted to be near my kids at the end of the day so we could like all go home together. And
such a silly detail, but it makes a huge difference.
It does.
Huge difference. When you're able to find a little bit of integration between what you're doing at work and your family life, just by virtue of the distance, how much you have to be in the car, it just makes such a huge difference. Yeah,
or sharing that commute time together on the way home, or in later years, a bus actually from Denison, one of the bus stops was Kennedy, and I just have so many memories of sitting at my desk alone at the end of the day. It was really quiet, and I'd be grading on my papers, and I'd hear the bus brakes, and I knew then it was time to close up and go down. And then when my kids got a little older, I could go to the window and yell out to them, and I'd be like, I see you, you can come up. And then they, were old enough to walk across the teacher parking lot by themselves. So that was, it was a really positive time for us to all be in that Southwest Denver DPS land together. And then I moved into a sort of hybrid leadership role at Kennedy because we were an IB school, International Baccalaureate, and I became, I worked on the personal project, which is like a 10th grade passion project. It's really similar to what we're doing now with the Transitions Readiness Capstone and DPS. It's that idea of finding something that you're passionate about and researching and presenting on it. And so I was the coordinator for that, which reduced my time in the classroom a little bit. And then my principal at the time recommended that I look into Richie and think about becoming a principal, a school leader.
How many years were you a teacher at Kennedy before you considered being at Richie?
I guess before I considered it, probably around 6. I was still teaching in 2013, but just I think I had 2 classes, and then the rest of the time I was doing sort of leadership work, admin work, helping teachers prepare for things that had to do with International Baccalaureate. And so I was getting a bit of that experience around what it was like to be out of the classroom and leading adults. And so that was part of when I looked into Richie. And Richie really spoke to me. I think that the values and the way that that program was set up, and I got to do my internship at Kennedy, and that was really powerful. And then that was my first assistant principal job right after we graduated, I guess, 2015. I was hired as an assistant principal. And I, as a former English teacher, I was wondering what systems I would oversee at Kennedy. And Jeannie thought about it, and we had some movement. Herman Echeverria, my good friend and teacher neighbor, was moving up to North. And so his job over student services was the one that was open. And Jeannie said, I'm going to put you over student services. And I was like, I don't know anything about counseling. I really was, I was the teacher in English where the kids would say, Miss, like, how many credits is this class? And I was like, I don't know, just pass my class. Like, I didn't know about like box sheets or grad contracts or scheduling or graduation requirements. I just felt like my job as a teacher was to do what I needed to do to help them with the competencies of my class and you know, becoming a better reader and writer. So she was honest with me. She said, don't worry, that's a really strong team and they're going to teach you everything you need to know. And that was also a really good example and good way for me to learn about what we call service leadership. I really depended on that team to show me the ropes. And I quickly learned how I knew that team could function even higher, or how I could support them and advocate for them as their leader and being able to work at an even higher level. And that was a really valuable way for me to learn about leadership as well. And then with the counselors, I also got to oversee, in addition to my instructional load, you know, which was usually like English or art. I think I have overseen every content area at some point or another, which is good. I think that's how it should be, especially by the time you become a principal. And but then the mental health team too. So that was something that was more off my radar, if I'm really honest with myself as a teacher, that it wasn't as much of a focus. We didn't talk very much about like 504 plans. I mean, we had students who might have a 504, but very few. I mean, I think about how much more that's something that we have in terms of just sheer numbers in DPS now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the education of our staff and also the education of parents who are pushing for them, which is a different story, maybe a different podcast. But that was new to me as well. I had a really steep learning curve, but I became passionate about that. Like, what are we doing to make sure that every student has equal access in the classroom to the education that they deserve? And how are you going to remove barriers or give them something that they need so that they're on a level playing field? And what does that look like? And starting to sometimes think very creatively about that. And then the communication with the teachers around how important it was for them to look at those accommodations and think about, this is what this student needs in order to have the best chance for being successful in my class. And then I got to go to South from Kennedy. I really was interested in moving to an even bigger high school, and my kids were out of Denison at that point, so it was a logical time for me to migrate over to another neighborhood. And I was particularly drawn to the idea around the newcomer center and the diversity of the school, the languages that are spoken, and overseeing a bigger team. There was a lot. I'd heard really amazing things and had gone to shadow Jen Hansen when she was at East. And she had been an assistant principal at East, and then she became the principal of South. So she hired me there. And then again, I said working at Kennedy was such an amazing experience for me. And I'd become a teacher there, really. Like that was where I'd learned so much as a teacher. But going to South, by my best example or my best description of that, it was like Technicolor. I mean, it's truly the most diverse high school, I think, in DPS, because you have your neighborhood families who are living around Wash Park, and they have a lot of privilege and a lot of expectations around what they think high school should be for their student. And also a huge amount of generosity. Like, it's a very involved PTA. They're very supportive of teachers. They do a lot of grants for teachers. And then when I was first there in 2017, we were still 62% free and reduced lunch, so over 50%.
Wow.
And then in the time that I was there for the last 5 years, I think we're down to I think it's almost like 30% now. It's such a huge change in demographic. Yeah. But working with the newcomers and working with the counselors on how we schedule in an equitable way and make sure that our language learners' needs are being met, or when they're exited from the newcomer program, how are we going to build their schedule and make sure that they're having the educational experience that they are fighting for, that they've risked to come. And I can't say enough about how amazing it was and how much I learned from working with the paraprofessionals at South. It's a team of probably 12, and they are there for us when we need to do in-the-moment translation for students or for families in our top 12 languages. And I just felt really privileged to work with that kind of support.
12 languages.
Well, there's 63 languages spoken there, so.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I am. I love South. It has a really special place in my heart for sure. Like every DPS school I've been affiliated with as a leader, a teacher, or a parent. But I became really passionate and focused on the whole child and supports that have to do with students outside the classroom, which was a really interesting trajectory for me because I had been so academically focused myself as a student, and then as a teacher, I really thought that my job was my support for students and even my own children was to make sure that they achieved academically. And there's just so much more to it than that. And that if a student's basic needs aren't being met, then how can they? Yeah. So
100%.
And so we did a lot of work at South. I learned so much from those teams, and we got really innovative during the pandemic around how we were going to do whole child supports through a pandemic. We made a virtual calming room. We
what?
Yeah, we did a
virtual calming room.
Yeah, I think there's probably still a link out there, but it was just an example of what could we do to really think about how we could meet the needs of students in this stressful time. And then I've always worked with the transitions team at both my leadership positions. So having those conversations with students where, what if a large comprehensive high school is not working out? If you can tell yourself that you have tried every intervention possible that's available to you at a large school, then at a certain point you want to support the family and say, there are other options in DPS. We are so fortunate that we have that's built into our system, that we have these pathways. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot about pathways and pathway thinking, for lack of a better term, from my former boss, Bobby Thomas, who had come from the pathway world. And I became just more interested in that idea that if I was going to leave South and that team that we had really solidified and just worked very well together. But if I was going to become a principal, I knew I wanted to be a principal of a small pathway school. And then I decided right after Omicron, when things were opening up a little bit last year and we were getting invited to we could go into schools again, I reached out to Kim Ortiz, and she is the founding principal of Compassion Road. She wrote a 117-page innovation plan, which I read.
Oh my gosh.
And I reached out and said, I've recommended your school ever since I became an assistant principal because I think your model is so amazing and so necessary right now. It's just so timely. And I want to know more. I would like to come and visit. And she said, absolutely. And I went and visited. And then I found out that her job was posted, that she was retiring. And I just decided to go for it. And I'm so happy to be in this new role. So, boy, that's 20 minutes. That's a long leadership story, the circuitous route. So I should probably pause for questions.
Oh, I just love how you're able to make those connections from your leadership story, going from exclusive academic focus as a very successful teacher. I think you've failed to mention that you were a distinguished teacher.
That's true. I was. I still have my little tile.
Yeah.
Thinking about.
Oh yes, we got those tiles. I had that too. I got it 2 years.
Yeah, we should retile our bathrooms. Just have those in there.
They are blue or purple.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, not only you were you are a distinguished educator, but in your years at Kennedy, you built a legacy at Kennedy. People love you very, very much.
Oh, I love that team too. I do.
I got to see that when we worked together 1 year at Kennedy. As we both were APs, and I just got to see how much people loved you and respected you. And I have a super cool story with one of our security officers, Irving Payan.
Oh, yes.
He is, I think he was a police officer. Now he's working for the Department of Safety and Security. He came here a couple of weeks ago, and every time I see him, we always talk about you.
Oh.
He remembers you with such a, you have a very special space on his heart. Like, he remembers you with a lot of appreciation. And the current teachers, I don't know if they're still at Kennedy, but back then, they saw you as an AP, but also as a role model teacher. So even though your story, you think it's a long story, I think you still have a lot to share with regards to how successful, how thoughtful, how engaged, and how big of a hard worker you've been throughout your career. And now seeing you get into Compassion Road, shifting from academic excellence, which is something you're going to carry with you your whole life, but transitioning from serving a large counseling team, taking care of mental health services, but also opportunities for college and career. Yeah. You're like the ideal person for that job. It's so cool.
I hope so. I mean, thank you, because it's such an honor to work there and to have that position. And my first order of business is to prove through work ethic, because I think you said it, I am a hard worker.
You are.
And that I wanted the staff to know, and the community and the people who chose me for that job, who offered me that opportunity, that I'm going to take it serious. I'm going to work hard and have fun. I shouldn't say seriously so much, because it's been a lot of fun. I've got some good stories, but I kind of got to work on that straight away. So a good example of that was, I knew that we were projected for 54 students for fall adjustment, and I thought that's nice to have such a small school, but that's not really sustainable. And I asked the staff, several staff members and the outgoing principal, what do you think is the ideal number for this building that we're in? Because there's always the space constraint as well, and we're in a pretty unique building. And they said probably about 110. So when the school was closer to 200 in the beginning, it was a tight squeeze. It wasn't ideal learning space for the students. If you think about that, is being said right now by the architects that are sending things out in DPS, that the building is one of the teachers, right? Like, we want to have a good space. Mm-hmm. And so they said 110 for that space, and I took an amazing spreadsheet that the dean at my school, Phil Olette, had created, where he really did a lot of research to look at what are who are some students based on data from large high schools, large comprehensives in Denver, who could have struggled last year with grades and attendance and being on track. And I made 125 phone calls over the summer, and I just had really powerful conversations with parents, grandparents, aunties, sometimes students, and said, this is an opportunity. This isn't a punishment. You're not getting kicked out of South. You're not, getting kicked out of TJ. I don't have that power. I don't want that power.
Right.
But what if you could have a school that is smaller? It has the mental health support that you might need to deal with your stress and your anxiety, which is more prevalent post-pandemic. And you could catch up on credits. And how does that sound?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was. And now, so at fall adjustment, we were at 84.
What?
Yeah,
there you go.
There we go.
Well, all I have to say to you, Compassion Road people, teachers, families, and kids, you're pretty darn lucky to have a principal like this one.
Well, I feel lucky, so
yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sure that, this is your first year too. Yeah. So obviously you're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn. You are not afraid of taking risks. I've seen you taking risks and trying new things. So it's not only that you're a hard worker, you're also like to innovate. And so I'm not worried about the mistakes you're going to make, because you always make something good out of it. So,
well, hopefully it's important, like the ownership or that accountability. I mean, I know we still talk about the DPS values that they rolled out back then, and but that worked. It resonates with me. I really do think about, I've coached people on that. Like, I made this mistake, or I'm nervous about calling this parent, and I'm like, but you need to be accountable and talk about own the mistake, and then what are we going to do to move forward? How are we going to grow from it? What can we do to make it better? But I think that goes a long way, where you can tell people, yeah, I made a mistake, and I'm gonna learn from it and
just
make it better.
Work on it.
Yeah.
Because this is your first year as a principal, but it's not your first year as a leader. You've been doing this for a while, and I think at some point, even before you became a Richie, you had some sort of leadership in your department too.
Yeah. So I was overseeing the English department. I mean, I wasn't a department chair, or I don't even know if we had department chairs in that way that you were more of like a leader. But we had a year where we had some new teachers, and they needed a lot of support and guidance around the curriculum and, you know, the way that we were, again, because I was an experienced IB teacher and had been to a lot of IB training, I think I took on a natural leadership role in that regard. And that made for an interesting segue to leadership. You might remember one of the things I asked about when we were in Ritchie and we had to talk about difficult conversations. One of my favorite books was that one, but I struggled with the people who I was evaluating in the English department had mentored me there as a new teacher. And then I had moved into leadership, and that was tricky.
That's tricky.
Yeah.
Especially because by virtue of the seniority and looking up to them, now you're in a different position, it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about asking you this question, because being almost a decade in leadership, or maybe over a decade in leadership, and working with so many different leaders, and you yourself being so self-reflective and such a hard worker, I'm sure you have been able to build an idea of what a good leader is, exemplar leadership. And, you know, we learn not only for the great leaders that we admire, we also see leaders who struggle. And from their struggles, we also draw lessons for ourselves. At least that's what I do.
For sure.
I'm sure you do that as well. And Richies, being Richies together, being, you know, always around other leaders, we typically pick up from their behaviors and their successes and failures. What have you learned? What do you think the attributes of a great leader are?
Avoid that.
Give me a second. Let me see if I'm recording properly here. I don't want to miss any of this.
I think, I mean, are you good?
Yeah.
For attributes, I think, for sure, work ethic. I think if your team sees that you are willing to work hard for what you're asking of them, that it's like a shared value, and that you will work hard alongside them, that has resonated with me. And I think I've always wanted to work by example on that as part of my values as a leader. But definitely, I mean, the idea around leading for equity and how much I know I've evolved in that journey as a leader. And I think a lot of us in DPS, I think I've really learned more than I thought I would from like the equity experience, for example. I think in the beginning you're like, oh, we have so many trainings that we have to do, or there's so many different initiatives that we've done. We've done Relay, we've done, you know, I did cognitive coaching, which I loved cognitive coaching, but when you have like things that are kind of rolled out that you have to do, and then I remember being like really impacted at how powerful I thought it was to go through that leadership, the equity experience, and to see our colleagues that we work with in different capacities in DPS sharing their stories and sharing their perspectives. And I'm so drawn to people's stories. I'm so nosy. I can't help it. And I love the story. Like I'm
Yes.
in English. I want to read short stories. I want to read memoirs. And when you would, in some of those examples where you would just listen to perspective of, you know, what it was like for some of our colleagues when they were in school, or what were their struggles, who was the teacher that they needed, or how difficult was it for them to get to college? How many times did they change their major in college, you know, because they were struggling academically? Or it made me really think more about that idea of equity and ensuring that at that leadership level, that every system that you're creating has that in mind. And when I was learning to be a scheduler,
Ew.
And we don't.
I don't like that job.
That job, that's right. You took that over at Kennedy.
I did not.
Oh, you didn't?
I think if I would have stayed a little bit longer, I probably would have been.
Oh, maybe it was Emily. I think Emily did that. Yeah, who taught me a lot about scheduling.
It's a very important job. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, but
it's
hard. But I do remember one of the quotes from a mentor of mine that resonated with me was, and we've thankfully changed it. We don't call it the master schedule anymore. It's the primary schedule or the secondary schedule. But the secondary schedule should be a reflection of your school's vision. And when you think about that and you look at the way, like, what classes are you offering and how are they, or are they really open access? Like, do you have your schedule set up and the conversations that counselors are having with students so that when you walk into a classroom, how diverse is that class going to be? Is it going to be more white kids in an AP class, or it's, how can you build systems so that you're not just virtue signaling? Because that's something that is, bothers me. The idea that you're going to say, we have an equity statement or we have an equity mission or vision on our website or whatever, but you're not really building systems that you can say, as a result of doing this, this changed. This, this was what the demographics were, or the disparity data. That's how that changed. And so thinking really about equity from, yes, of course, a philosophical standpoint. Like, that's the bare minimum, right? Like, put up your signs, like, do all of that because you want to, like, walk into a space and feel like you know what people stand for, and make sure that what you're actually doing and the conversations that you're having around systems like a schedule, like the way you set that up, the way you award honors credit, like those kinds of things, that you really have equity in mind with that. So that's just been huge for me. And thinking about equity in every aspect, like thinking about, we talk more about, ableism and things we're thinking about, or neurodiversity. I mean, that really comes into play quite a bit at my new school at Compassion Road. Like, people who learn differently, people who, they need a break because they're anxious or they're overstimulated, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't figure out how to give them that accommodation so that they can then get back on track to learning and hopefully learn some skills that will take them out into post-secondary life, whatever that might be. So I would say, equity and hard work. And I think collaboration. I think when you're not really collaborating with your teams, it's so evident that it's like your teams pick up on that. I know you're making the cringy face, yeah. And so that's a few of my highlights, I would say. And honestly, sense of fun. I just think if you take yourself too seriously, this job is so hard and amazing. I sometimes used to say, this is the worst, best job. Because you're like, this is, like, and here's why I can explain that. Because if that question that they would put on Collaborate, I think it's there this year on Your Voice, Tuvo, is, when you tell people what you do for work, or when you tell people you work in DPS, do you do that with a sense of pride? And my answer for that, spoiler alert for whoever's analyzing that data, is always the highest. I'm so proud of the work that I do. I love telling people about my job and my values associated with working for DPS and with education. And it's just, sometimes it's just so hard, like the things that you're dealing with on the day-to-day. But if you get into this job because part of how you're going to live a happier life is that what you do aligns with your values, then there is no better job.
100%. I was going to share that in my case personally, I don't know if this happens to you. I assume it might happen to you as well. But in my case, being a school principal, the responsibility is so big. When I have my two boys, my two sons come to my own school, and I love I love that as just that, like the greatest privilege I could ever have. It's just get him in my car, park on the principal spot, get him out of the car, and then they go to the cafeteria. The sense of responsibility that comes with the fact that my own children plus 300 other families trusted their most precious thing to me, I cannot allow myself to suck.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I'm challenged by, you were mentioning something really beautiful that I really appreciate. The idea of being a collaborative, right? Like trying to find that collective wisdom within your team, or when I'm challenged by a situation that I don't know how to respond, or I don't have the skills yet on how to solve it, I feel so compelled and so encouraged to, you got to figure this out. No. We're not going to wait until tomorrow. The problem is we gotta pick up that phone and figure that out right now. Is that sense of urgency that comes with the fact that we are raising the future. Like the quality of Denver in 15 years will depend on what we're doing in our schools.
Yep.
Like nobody else.
Yeah.
So when I think of an attribute of a good leader, I think of exactly what you're talking about, the idea of having a strong work ethic, leading for equity, making sure that whatever system we're creating benefits everybody. And that sense of urgency, we cannot wait for next week. We cannot wait for, somebody to get back to us and give us the answer we're looking for. We got to really go out and take action.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something, too, that brings me back to when the first thing I said in this podcast around thinking about it as a parent. Like, we're both DPS parents, and you walk into a classroom or you walk into a building, and you literally right now get to think this: what do I want for my own kids? And even when I didn't have kids in DPS anymore, I bring that perspective. So I guess perspective is the other one, and that empathy of like, this is, you said it, this is someone's baby. And, when I had my kids coming home and telling me all the amazing things they did in Miss Liz's class or Miss Shayna's class or Miss Christie, and I just thought I was so grateful to them. I was so grateful for what they were expanding in my kids and making their lives so rich. I just about, an hour ago, we were talking during lunch duty at my school, and we were talking about PE teachers. My nephew on Long Island in New York is going to be a PE teacher, and it'll at the end of this year. And I thought, oh my God, what a great job. And my kids still talk about their elementary school PE teacher. Like whatever he said, that was what was happening. Like it was the most important thing. And I just think about that, that sense of how much trust we're getting from parents as educators, but then from kids too. Like they trust what we're going to do for them or advocate for them. And then unfortunately, like when that trust gets broken, you can repair it, right? Like you hope you can, but it's so precious. Like you really need to value that and really think carefully about how you interact with that in mind. So I think perspective is another one that what you said kind of made me think of that as well.
Yeah. I also, kids trust you with whatever leadership and initiative you're putting in place, but also when you're working at the elementary level, kids will trust you even when you're doing the wrong thing. And that's when the burden of responsibility comes to my shoulders, because I know my babies, especially in the culture of this school, is so beautiful, and I'm so grateful in many levels. But when kids, they will do anything you ask them to do. And if you adopt the wrong instructional strategy, when you give the wrong PD, or when you coach teachers in the wrong skill sets and they multiply those things, kids will still behave and do what you ask them to do, but that doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing. So that idea of being wise, having that wisdom that just comes with experience also, it's always on the back of my head. Like, I need to definitely be on my best game.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you too about how important it is for you to have a strong school culture, and how do you build it?
Oh, well, we're working on that right now. So it's been really exciting, because the culture right now is, it's new for me, right? This is, I've never been at a school that's so small. I mean, we have 84 students and 9 teachers and 20 total staff. And so there's a lot that's new for me in how to build culture, and that attracted me to a small school like that, really. And we're having a lot of fun right now with our students they are really advocating for themselves around what they want high school to look like. I think that all those calls that I made over the summer and just the idea of what high school can be like at Compassion Road or at other pathways, kids are starting to really advocate for themselves and think about how high school might look different than what they thought it was going to, but that's okay, and that there's things that we can do in our space that can build a really positive culture. So for example, we have a period called enrichment, which is like we have a period from 12:30 to 1:30. You can take a certain class on Monday, Wednesday, and another one on Tuesday, Thursday. So because we're credit recovery and so small, we pretty much have to focus on the cores, math, science, English, social studies. We do have art. So enrichment is this period in the day where you can really think about a super engaging class. And this is part of the model that Kim Ortiz put together, was to have this. So right now our offerings are personal finance, skateboarding, rock climbing, mindful coloring. We have an LGBTQIA affinity group. Music production, chess, strategy games. Next quarter, we're going to bring in yoga because we found a really great new yoga teacher. And so they rotate, right? So we try to get some interest from students. But I had a student come up to me. I had recruited him from South. I talked to him and his mom over the summer, and they came and visited. And I remembered how much he was struggling at South last year, and what the student who I knew last March, when I really started to think about potentially a transition for him, and then the student who came up to me last week, and he's like, "Miss, I want to teach an enrichment. I want to offer an enrichment."
The kiddo.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because he's so, he's been talking to students about his culture and his language. And so he thought it would be interesting if he could do that as an enrichment. And I just thought, like, they're like really starting to own it. And then we had other kids who were like, "I want to have a debate or like a world issues class. And I want that to involve some kind of monthly community service." And I'm like, "Yup, we can do that." Like, and then now they want student government. Like they want to have Spirit Week next week, right? Like, so you've got kids who they weren't necessarily learning their best in their parents' basements, during remote learning, but you put them back in a large high school and they just might have been kind of lost and not really ready to be overwhelmed in such a large environment. And so now they're at our school and they're comfortable enough to really get into this point of advocating for what they want. And I see it with the staff too, like coming up with ideas and pitching them to me because they know I'm open to learning. I want to know about the school from people who've been there, right? And who've seen some different iterations of what can be a success versus a struggle. And so we're having a lot of fun coming up with good ideas and just like, bouncing them off of each other. And that's part of how we're building some really positive culture.
I love that I asked you about school culture and the first thing you went to was about kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Immediately. Like I thought you were going to talk about parents or teachers. You went straight to the kids. Like this is what we're doing, building the culture of the school.
Well, I hope that the kids' excitement will get their parents to come because we know that's a challenge in high school. I mean, it is. But we're listening to what the kids say about like, my mom drops me off in the morning, and like a lot of kids say that, like that's how they get to school. And so we didn't do a back to school night. We did a pancake breakfast, and it's like, come whenever you drop your kids off, even if you can just come in for like 10 or 15 minutes, have a cup of coffee, you can meet me. But I'm hoping that by bringing the kids' involvement really up, that they can also get their parents to become more involved is what I'm hoping. And they've inspired me to want to come up with creative solutions. And the other thing that's going really well with our culture, I really want to give a shout out to the dean and the senior team lead at my school, who I work really closely with because I don't have an AP. So they're like who I get to work with for leadership advice. And we talked about our location in Golden Triangle, and kids come from all over. They come from all different neighborhoods. And that seemed a little bit like a culture barrier. And then so we decided to turn that around. And so I should have worn my T-shirt. What the heck?
Next time.
Yeah,
For second round, you bring your...
Yeah. So we got this amazing graphic, and I worked with a student who actually used to go to South, so another DPS grad. And the back is a neighborhood. It's one of those maps where you can see like every neighborhood in Denver.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got our little golden triangle, around it. And then it says Compassion Road around. And then on the front, we've got our golden triangle, and it says every community, every neighborhood, every student. Because we're like, well, we're every neighborhood school.
You literally are.
We are. I mean, and then so now we're getting to have these really amazing relationships with these businesses and residences in Golden Triangle. So we had, here's a way to take a culture thing and kind of turn it around. So we had the first couple weeks of school, there's a cool, kind of grassy area across the street, and we're closed campus. That's part of what happens when you got to do credit recovery, and you got to get it done.
Nobody's gonna leave here until you're done.
Yeah, one of the kids said to me, he's like, "Miss, you came to the school, you closed it down." I'm like, no, it was like this when I got here. And he said, "This is like middle school," and I said, "No, it's actually like adult land. We don't usually go out for lunch. We pretty much just stay in." So I said, "When you guys go to lunch, you don't leave." But we have this grassy area across the street, but it's attached to this like super fancy high-rise apartment building in Golden Triangle. It's their property, and it's where they go to have their dogs, play around, and they have benches and stuff there. But our kids love going over there. So I got an email from the building manager about a month ago, and she's really nice. She's like, we just noticed some trash, and some kids were vaping, and we're a no-smoking building, because they were kind of hiding around the bushes or whatever. So we said to the kids, okay, no more. That's their property. Like, we can't go over there anymore. But one of the kids said to me last week, she's like, "Miss, when will we be able to go back over there?" And I said, "You know what? We've been really good neighbors, and I'm going to reach out and ask them if they'll give us another chance, because you guys have been so amazing." And I immediately got a response back from the building manager. She's like, "We'd love to have you back. Oh. And we're going to bring Halloween candy for them." And they were out there. Today was the first day. And it was just so nice to have this feeling of like, we can earn that back. Like, we made a mistake. You guys, don't leave trash, and no vaping. But then they got to go back there. And the people in the community and around our neighborhood are really welcoming, and it's been great. So that's part of another positive culture, is to like celebrate that we're in this cool location. So that's part of it.
That is so cool. It is taking me, the way you talk about culture takes me straight forward to equity. Mm-hmm. The idea of building culture by giving kids opportunities, it just connects me immediately with equity. And I know you already touched some of the equity points around your own personal story. And when we were talking about the attributes of a great leader, you were talking about equity too. But I wonder if there is anything else you would like to share about what you believe equity is and how that connects with Black excellence. I have had other leaders address this, and I wonder what your take is on those two things. Equity, what is your understanding of equity, and what Black excellence is?
For equity, I think it goes down to that idea of individualized supports based on the needs of your students. And that could be a population of students, like if you're thinking about race and you're thinking, again, how that ties to Black excellence, like what does the historical data show us around how our Black students are performing, or how often they are, coming up in the behavior tab? Like, what are the barriers that they face? Like, we need to address that data on an individualized basis for what's best for those students. That's equity. I mean, it's the old overused visual that we see where it's like the difference between equality and equity. It's like sometimes people need more. They need more support, because that's how you're going to give people the opportunities that they deserve, or that maybe they have been a barrier before, that they have barriers have existed that have prevented them from having opportunities. And so I think that in order to know what some of those individualized supports look like, you have to reach out to families, you have to get that perspective, like you and I have been talking about a little bit, and thinking about like Black Excellence or Black Excellence Plan. I think one of the most powerful parts of that at South, or what our plan is at Compassion, is reaching out to families, reaching out to our families, our Black families. I mean, I know that was a big push for us at South specifically because you had a bigger group, so you're trying to reach out to, specifically, we divided up, every Black family got a phone call from a leader so that you could really say, like, tell me about your experience at this school. Is there, because, on like a one-to-one basis where you really were giving an audience for getting some perspective around what are your needs? What do you need from school? What are your expectations? Or is there anything that you want to tell me? Like really listening and valuing that perspective, and then taking that, I think the name for it now, we were doing that, but I think now we're actually calling it empathy interviews, right? That makes sense. Mm-hmm. But that speaks to me because I mean, we are empathetic leaders. Like that's what we've been talking about. Like I want to be put in your shoes. I want you to know that I understand, and I'm willing to really think about what your needs are. And then I'm someone who has some level of decision making. Mm-hmm. I don't want to use the word power because that seems like the wrong word, but like a decision-making ability to try to impact what you need. And so that, I think, is the relationship between equity and Black excellence. And it's interesting, I saw in the data after some of those initiatives that we put in place at South, I mean, I haven't been at Compassion long enough to realize some of that and look at the data, but I was really encouraged to see that we saw really positive changes in the data related to our Black students. And then it made us realize, like, we really do need to do some of these things for our other BIPOC students. Like, what are we doing for our Hispanic students? And I mean, at South too, you've got, it's so diverse. Like, you really have to be culturally responsive. Like that word, like you're responding to the cultural needs of different groups.
Yeah, the community.
Yeah.
When we talk about equity, and I've been reflecting on this deeply, but actually I'm going to ask you another question first before I go on my own rant.
No, go. I'm ready. I'm so chatty. I'm ready to listen.
So I have had many podcasts already. I've been very lucky to have really good conversations. And I have noticed something with the people that I talk to. Some people who are white, Caucasians, some of them have a degree of hesitancy to talk about Black excellence because they see themselves as obviously non-Black people, and they feel that they don't have the right or the competence to talk about Black excellence properly. And I wonder if you feel that way, or I wonder if you feel like, no, this is my life. This is what I've done, and I can speak to it.
Well, I think that we have to be aware of our own privilege. And I think that deference that maybe you're picking up on from white educators is like really having, I hope it's a reverence and a respect for the fact that, like, how much can I really, I want to be mindful that there's always going to be a chance that someone who will look at me and say, you don't get this. You're trying, and keep trying, because like we've got to try. We've got to do everything that we possibly can to try to dismantle his systemic racism. Like that is, it reminds me again. I'm going back to those equity modules because the analogy that I just thought was so powerful was like, you have to be walking the opposite direction on that moving sidewalk, like literally going the opposite direction of how things have been going if you want to really say that you're working to try to dismantle systemic racism or call yourself an ally. I mean, I think we, in our spirit, think that we're allies, and then you have to say, well, but what are you really doing? And I've done a lot of reflection around that with like the equity team at South and some of my Black colleagues. Well, one of my Black colleagues in particular, Fletch, he said to us in one of the meetings, he's like, are you at the point where, like, if you were in a meeting or like the teacher's lounge with colleagues or something, and somebody said something that was just, you wouldn't say it, it's not quite the right thing to say, or it's kind of, you know, somebody could take offense to it. Are you ready to then be the one who's going to call that person out? Because that's anti-racist. Like you're not going to say it. Okay, that's one thing, right? But you like, and you don't think it, and you're offended by it. But you've got to like literally call people out on it and say that is not okay. And I think that maybe what you're picking up on is that that idea that we need to respect that we have every positive intention and we want to keep learning and we want to keep growing and understanding perspectives, and yet we still have a lot to learn. And so we have to maybe hold back a little bit just out of respect to say, I still know that there's stuff that I need to be taught, that I need to grow, I need to challenge myself maybe.
Yeah, but I'm asking you this question because I have seen you lead for years. So it's not that I am asking this question to somebody I don't know. You always put yourself and your leadership in perspective. You said it earlier, like trying to find that perspective on what the other lived experiences are and how can I accommodate my leadership to meet your needs. And I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to approach what we believe equity is, what Black excellence is, beyond your race and beyond your skin color. Is that idea of I am a leader who is an instrument and I am going to accommodate my services to you in a way that make you feel successful. That's what I listen you say as you define equity and Black excellence. So I am very proud and appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk about it, even though you're not a Black person, or
right.
Because I think beyond our history or beyond our backgrounds, we have the responsibility to see humanity in others and position ourselves in a place where we can help them.
Right, like we were just saying. I mean, if the thing that you can do to be an advocate and an ally and active in what is to take the perspective that you learn about either through directly asking someone and or from what you see over time or with data that's just, you know, inequitable, that you take the fact that you do have some decision-making power and you're like, I am going to make a change with this. I'm going to push back. I'm going to, I think about at the English teachers at South really looked at some of the texts that went along with the capstone tasks. And they came to me and they said, this is all white guys. It's how can we be talking about culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive texts, and then this is what's here. And I know that they were in the process of changing them, but that team said, we want to change them now. And here's what we want to change to. And they made some changes actually in the curriculum too. But they took the time to really look at, what do we want to change it to? Here's why, like the rationale statement. Here's how it's still going to meet these standards. Here's the lexile level, the rigor of the text. We want to make sure that we're aligned with that. Here's how you can still use the same prompt on, you know, how the students are going to be assessed on the capstone, but with these texts. And I was like, absolutely, that's what we're doing. I mean, yeah. And I felt, again, going back to being proud to work for DPS, I really had like no doubt that I could go to my boss, Bobby, and I'd be like, this is what's going on in English.
No problem.
Yep. And then that we could go above that. And it's like, yeah, this is the right decision. And so that's the kind of thing I think where you are thinking, what are the changes that we are going to commit to and do and just push back on because we know what's right or what aligns with being anti-racist.
Yeah. Absolutely. I also love how you spontaneously went to talking about kids and what they needed when you were talking about culture. It was like a no-brainer. That just speaks to how authentic you are in the way you lead. The rant I was going to go on earlier was when we think about equity, we're thinking we position ourselves in our own lived experiences to talk about equity. And when it doesn't happen in DPS as much as it happens in other districts. I've been having conversation with other people who take a positive stand towards standardized assessment their argument is, well, we need to do standardized assessment to see if kids are doing good at school. Standardized assessment is to measure if you're doing good academically. Duh, right? And that point of view just reflects the lived experiences of someone who went to school to learn. Because all the other needs were met at home or in the immediate community. So obviously, I go to school to learn. I don't have any other business to do at school. I just go to learn how to add and subtract fractions and identify the main idea in a text, or maybe do a scientific experiment. And then I go back home and I join my after-school club and have dinner with my mom and dad and go to bed.
Right.
And from that point of view, standardized assessment, for example, is one way of, measuring if you're doing good at school. But if you are on the other side, if you grew up without your parents and you were sleeping on a minivan at night, and actually the only place where you will eat a fresh meal was at school, and the only person who told you positive compliments were your homeroom teacher, then you grew up to be a leader and you question whether or not standardized assessment is the main way to measure a student's success, because your idea of success goes beyond what academic achievement is. So it is really important for, no matter where our walk of life is, when we think of our kids or when we think of our leadership, is exactly what you just said. We just go back to the kids and see what they are, who they are, what they need, what do they want to offer, and put things into perspective. And I think only that way we can be inclusive of also the leaders and the kids who, no matter where they are in life, they're being able to pay attention to who they're leading for and what they're doing. But it's such a sensitive topic for me because I always go on rants.
That's a worthwhile rant, and you just inspired me with your rant. So last weekend, I went to a conference with a counselor from South who submitted a presentation and it got accepted. So it was for the National Association of College Admissions Counselors Conference in Houston last weekend, and our presentation was how you can equitably bring post-secondary planning curriculum to the second largest high school in Denver, because you've got kids who are working with a post-secondary planner or a college counselor or whatever. They go to a private school and they're working with, a counselor who has like 20 kids or something, and in public high schools they have 350, So it was like she built this curriculum that was really successful of how to roll that out through advisement classes in a large public high school so that there's more equity in the process. Anyway, while we were there, I got to probably look this up on my phone when you're going on a next rant, but this guy was one of the speakers at this conference. He's a professor at, maybe it's University of Houston. He's a professor at a college in Texas. I'm going to look it up for you. So we got a copy of his book, which I have. Don't buy it. I can lend it to you. And it's called How to Teach Black History to White People. So this guy, he wrote this book, and then he teaches a class how to teach Black history in the era of Trump. Formerly, he taught a class called How to Teach Black History in the Era of Obama. This guy was like, oh my God, so amazing. I want to go take a class with him in the summer. I'm like, college is wasted on the young. I just want to go take a class. So he was talking about standardized tests and GPA and all this stuff. And he was really, talk about a rant. I mean, he was sweating. He was like really getting into it. And he said that he had a story about a kid in Texas who lived, I guess, in what they call the Valley. I wasn't aware of this, but he pointed out that the student would be like even crossing the border to go into high school. Like he was taking like a 4-hour trip every day because he wanted to play high school football at a certain high school. And then I think he was applying to go to this college, and the professor was advocating for him, and someone was like, well, what's his GPA? And he's like, this kid is going 4 hours round trip, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, because he wants to go to this school. And you want to know what his GPA is? You don't want that kid in your college? You don't think that he's going to like do something amazing one day? I don't care about his GPA. He's like, I don't care. And then he did this other thing where he got kids to go. He took a group of Black kids to go to Beijing, to go to China. And he was like, talk to the study abroad office. And once again, they were talking about like, oh, well, they have to have a certain GPA to get into the study abroad. And he was like, why? Why would they need that? And he kind of like shut it down. And because I guess, now he's getting like, more decision-making power, right? Like, he is Black, but he has, like, that's what we're talking about. He has decision-making power to influence people to say, that's not okay. Like, that is not okay. So you are not the only one who's going to rant about that, because it's rant worthy.
It is.
Yeah.
And that takes me to the other question I wanted to ask you, precisely about those systems and structures that have lived within the public education system forever. I think since it was created, I don't know, at least 100 years. And I just want to just maybe reflect with you about what current thing in our education system you would like to see changed in your lifetime.
Yeah. Well, I'm speaking in a very unique and privileged position on this because of my new jobs. But I have the luxury of having such a small school that we can really think about things on such an individualized basis. And that, again, goes back to when we talk about equity and talk about needs of students. But that's also how we can be more innovative, is I think we really have to stop thinking about, we say, education is not the same for every kid. It's not, it can't be so cookie cutter like the way it was when we were an industrialized nation and we were like, the values were such that, everything has to be the same and you have to sit in these desks in rows and do this. Like, we're getting there, like, we're going through that process of seeing that some things need to change, but we need to be more innovative and more specialized. And we have to find a way to do that, even if we're dealing with large populations of students. And I think that I had a chance to really learn about how to do that, even though I was at the second largest high school in Denver. And I knew that the next step would be for me to do that at a smaller school and really think about what you need to do for this student, and that being truly responsive to set up education in a way where you are not assuming that kids are going to, like you said, do well on standardized tests, or that they are going to sit for, hours. I mean, that would be, it's so hard to think of, right? We see adults in PD, like, it's so antsy, and,
Yes.
You're not supposed to be on your phone, and you want to get up or walk around, or like people like you who are really into like movement and exercise. I was talking to somebody about that book, Spark, where they did somebody in Chicago used data to figure out that if kids at this struggling school got up and went for a run in the morning, like, then he tracked their data and saw how much better they did. And I think we have these pockets of these success stories, and yet we need to move with more of a sense of urgency around it. Like, and the talking about it and the showing people ideas and the TED Talks and stuff like that is a good first start, but we have a chance post-pandemic to really think about ways that we had to reimagine what school is. And that's I've got to quote Susan on that, because she used to say we were going to reimagine the high school experience, but the school experience, you're in elementary. And so, like, let's really do that. And so I think that, to go back to that's more agreeing with you. Yes, we need to reimagine it, but I think it has to do with having more a responsive attitude around the individual needs of students. And a lot of that begins with the mental health supports, because if you don't do that as part of what happens at school, then you're not really getting to the root of what some of the issues are. Like, we keep talking about a mental health crisis. Every time you open your NPR app, it's like statistics, it's in the New York Times, it's everywhere. And yet we should have, okay, I've got my answer. You should just cut to this part. This is the part. We should have like mental health offices in our buildings in a more expanded way. So like, I'm such a huge fan of Denver Health school-based clinics, and I've partnered with them. I've done conferences with my colleagues. Like Dr. LEADERboard is one of our itinerant psychiatrists in DPS, and I've worked with her a lot and have done some conferences with her around accessibility of mental health in public schools. So we are on that trajectory in DPS, right? Especially schools that have Denver Health school-based clinic or a more robust allocation of mental health providers. But we need way more of that because their caseloads are still too big. And then, so that's a space issue. So if we're talking about like the architecture of buildings or buildings that have space, if you have a kid who needs to have regular therapy and you think that a parent is going to leave work and go pick up that kid, and then most of us have Kaiser, and I don't know what, I mean, I love Kaiser, but for mental health, these are your choices if you do in person, and which I think you should, not telehealth. You can go to Hidden Lake, which is hidden. You can go to Aurora, or you could go to Highlands Ranch. So tell me that you're like me. I was working at Kennedy. I had a kid at DSA. Was I going to leave Kennedy and take time off, drive to DSA, drive him to an appointment, and then he was going to miss school and fall farther behind. So then that's more anxiety, and I'm missing work. So if we bring it into schools and have it really set up with more space and more providers, then I think we're going to have that more individualized approach, because you're going to find out from mental health experts, this is what this kid needs. Or they're just going to have that support right there. Like they don't have to, imagine if you sent them someplace else to go eat every time they were hungry, like out of the building, right? Like it's a basic need right now. We know that they need it. So I think that would be important. Oh, and childcare for on-site for teachers.
Oh my God, yes.
That would be another one.
Yes. Look, healthcare, Kaiser, whatever, their goal is to make money. Their goal is to make a profit. Right. It's not your health.
I know.
If it was your health, they will give you a discount every time you went to the doctor and your cholesterol levels were appropriate.
Right.
If it was about health, it will be a reduction on your medical bill every time you come and you lose a little bit of weight.
Right.
Like those incentives for you to get healthier. That never happened.
Yeah.
Never. No. Like you go with depression or with anxiety, they just give you a pill. They don't ask you how your relationship with your partner is.
Right. But giving that support more in schools, it really would be, teaching some of that. Like we talk about mindfulness and coping skills and strategies, and we're so fortunate at my school that our model is based on one-to-one mental health support for every student. And I guess we can do that because we're small, and that's the model of our school. But that's really what we need, is that kids need to be from a younger age or in school. If something comes up, like a traumatic life event or something that happens where they need even more support, that they have someone there. And then you get some of that support or coping mechanisms or whatever, and then you can go back to class. Like then you're back in the learning environment, and you're not being taken out of learning so much, which I think happens when you have to go navigate the healthcare system. If we can have that in schools, and I think that from the reality standpoint around, you and I know what it's like when you're you have an idea about what you want, and then you have to actually hire someone. And so, here's a little public service announcement. I think people should be getting into mental health positions, because I think that that's something that we're going to need more and more in schools. And I think that we should have programs set up at our partner institutions. And I think they're working on this. I heard about something maybe coming down from Governor Polis around trying to have like a pipeline where you could get some loan forgiveness and, I'm not going to go on that rant, but if you would go into a program focused on mental health and becoming a school psychologist or a school social worker. And I think that that's something that we really need to kind of grow programs like that to make that work, and then provide the space. I was giving the school, the psychiatrist from Denver Health came to South, they're itinerant, so they go to different schools. So she was at South one day a week, and space was an issue. And I was like, that's not an issue. You can have my office. I can go in classrooms. I like to be at the front desk and greet people. You don't let space be a barrier. But there's like only so much you can do that if you really wanted to have that. And she had a steady stream of kids who needed to see her and get some help.
100%. Oh my gosh, I agree. I think we should at least quadruple the amount of mental health support that we provide our kids and our teachers. Yeah. I mean, imagine coming after the pandemic, we should at least quadruple the amount of mental health support, because one of the things that we do, at least at my school, and what I noticed, the trends I notice with my colleagues' schools, is that the stance we take around mental health is to respond to what the kid is telling us they need. And the more critical the behavior, the more support we give. But there are many behaviors, many instances of trauma and mental health needs that go unseen.
Yeah.
Like many kids just want to be invisible. They're just struggling with so much that they just don't want anybody to pick on them, to let them go through the day as if they were invisible. And I think that population of kids is greater than the kids that flip table or smoke weed or ditch class.
Yeah, flying under the radar.
So where do we draw the line, right? Like where do we stop? Where do we say, okay, this is fine. Nobody else needs mental health support. And I think we're taking a gamble on that one, because if we were going to be honest, we will say at least 50% of every child that show up in a public school post-pandemic needs some sort of mental health. At least 50%.
Yeah. That was collective trauma. That was, trauma for a society.
Yeah. So, that's a great system. I would love to see that changed, at least addressed. And now I guess our responsibility as leaders, too, is to think of how that can be managed. Because many of those changes come with money.
Oh, yeah.
And with just political influence and changing, from legislature and all those things. But that aligns with one of the systems I wish I could see change before I die, which is the classroom sizes. Having being okay with 35 kids in a classroom, and then be strong about equity. Yeah, those two things, I struggle to keep those thoughts in my head at the same time. 35 kids, equity. I have two. Well, you had 4 kids. I have 2 boys. We're sitting at the table, and there is no way I can give them the same task and assume they both will be okay with it. They're completely different. Yeah. Your kids must be very different too.
Oh yeah, they are. And it's amazing how much I've learned from each of them in terms of like how they coped through the pandemic and what I saw, how that impacted their learning, their self-confidence. What were the things that they were doing to cope, or, examples of people like self-medicating or things that they did for comfort. And, you just kind of watch that unfold, and then you hope that it's kind of righting itself. But that's a long time that we endured that. It had like a really profound effect. So yeah, we watched that with our own kids. So we know that our students are dealing with that and dealing with it in different ways, even if they seem okay on the outside, like you said. And yeah, that class size thing goes back to, obviously our visions align, because if I moved from something that was really big because I could see how important it would be to have something smaller where you can really think about the individual needs of the students. And so I'm lucky that I get to do that at a pathway school, but it would be amazing to have that to be more widespread, to be more accessible for more students, than thinking that teachers trying to manage that. And then that does go to the teachers' mental health, like you were saying, thinking about what are we doing to support teachers and staff members' mental health and their burnout rates and things like that. And it would go a long way for that and sustainability in the profession, I think.
Yeah. Even if you go to the extreme perfection, actually I've done this in a few schools. I go to the most distinguished, best teacher that you have ever seen in action. You go to that classroom and you give that amazing teacher a full class size. Even with the most amazing teacher, you will have kids who are disengaged, and you will have kids who might need a second round of the same lesson. So it doesn't matter how good you are as a teacher if systemically you're setting them up to not being able to reach every kiddo. Mm-hmm. And I think by having 35 kids, I don't know, actually I wonder if anybody listening might be able to tell us what the max number of kids in other states or in other public schools is. I am curious to see, because that is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I might do a little anecdotal research on that, just ask. I mean, I have so many friends back in New York who are teachers, and I think that would be something that I'd be interested in knowing.
The last thing I have is, with regards to things that I would like to see changed, is the lack of physical activity in our kids.
Oh, yeah.
That is such an awful thing. And anybody listening could fact check me too, but I think by 2030, 50% of the U.S. population will be obese.
Yeah, that's, I mean...
5 out of 10.
Yeah, we definitely. I mean, I alluded to that book, Spark. I think there's a lot of research out there. I think we saw it with the school popping up like GALS, Girls Athletic Leadership School, where we see pockets of that again, where we know that this is something where research shows it's better for your mental health and it helps you with learning and focus. Like all the research points to that. And yet we talk about the research, but then we don't really implement it. And it's because it's, change on a large scale is harder, but you need to just still say, okay, so it's harder, but it doesn't mean that we can't try to make that change and build systems and be innovative. Because I agree. I think that is something that we should have a way bigger focus on. I had an exchange student when I was teaching at Kennedy, and she was from Germany, and she really pointed out some interesting differences that she said there. They would go to school. She thought we were in school for way too long. So she's like, it's so weird that we're here for so long. So they would get in at like 8 something, and they would stay in the classrooms, and they'd have a little brain break at a certain point. But the teachers came to them, the high school teachers. And so there was no dealing with like passing periods and stuff like that. Like they stayed there, they got their instruction. And then at around noon, they were done, and they could stay for lunch if they needed access to lunch, or they'd go home for lunch. They could go work. And then that was also when they had all this time for sports and other things that they did in addition to academics. And it was just interesting to think about like that, the way that it's you're kind of maximizing your time, like so that you could say, okay, we don't need passing periods. We don't need to have this time of transition and then kids, are late to the next class, or the teachers are trying to get it back going again. It's just, you have this, but then you have all that time in the afternoon for some of what you're talking about. And I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure there's other things that are a struggle with that, but that's the kind of thing where you realize you could be innovative and have some of what we're both talking about, a more individualized approach, smaller classes maybe, and more physical activity or varied activity for sure.
Yeah, just like a backwards plan from the society we want to see. Do we want to see healthier people? Do we want to see people with less mental health issues? You want to see people more willing and open to be social,
right?
Like the increasing amount of people who would rather just be by themselves, and the creation of mental health that comes as a consequence of that. We know those issues are manifesting in the adult population of the U.S. What can we do with the little ones so we can address those issues?
Well, this is like another podcast. I think you'll have to have me back on, and we should talk about the public health crisis of our phones, which we all use them, right? Like I'm trying not to be hypocritical when I say that. You came in and I was on my phone, I was on my email because I didn't bring my laptop. I wanted to see what was going on at school. I get that. And I have this story that I talk about where my kids, we'd go to the beach with my dad when he was alive, and he would be so happy that the kids were there. He'd sit a little farther away from us, and he'd use the occasion to light up a cigarette. And my kids were so shocked by this. Thankfully, right? Like they thought that was so strange. And he grew up in the 1940s in New York, and he didn't know any better. Like people smoked. Pregnant women smoked. They smoked on TV. They thought it was glamorous. They thought it was how you could lose weight. They didn't. And now it's a public health crisis. And I think that we will say, why did we give them those devices to put in their little hands in 6th grade or whenever? And like, how could we not have thought that would impact their mental health and their activity level? But we would have to start a school. We have to write a proposal for a school where everybody is on board, the teachers, the admin, the students, the parents. And actually my vision for this is repurposed old post office boxes where everybody comes in and you got a little key like you do at the post office, and you put your phone in so you know where your phone is, because we know it's an important device, it's expensive, we care about it. And then you can have a strategic tech check at some point during the day. But if you have an emergency, you call the front office, just like in the olden days. And then I think that parents would be like, oh, thank goodness. I just didn't want them to be on their devices at school. I don't want that. They could have a computer science class where they access tech to learn some coding or like some other things. But For everything else, no. I think we're going to go to that. I mean, now I'm torn about what I want to see in my lifetime. I don't want my grandchildren to be on their phones.
Being on your phones and sitting is two of the main things that will cause a lot of health issues when you grow up. Fun fact, if you work out 30 minutes every day, if you exercise religiously every day for 30 minutes, but at work you sit for over 5 hours, you will lose all the gains you did in 30 minutes of workout by just sitting for 5 hours. In fact, you will deteriorate your health even if you work out by sitting that long.
I believe it. I mean, it's too much sitting. I think that is, and that's how they are socializing, and it's just so cultural. If you try to be the one to take the phone away from your kid, then they're just, you're creating a different kind of stress and anxiety. So that's why it has to be a collective culture. Everybody has to be like, this is how we do it at this school. And we all are into it. And I think it would be amazing to track that data. I think it would be amazing to see how much better everybody's outcomes are physically and mentally. And, I feel like that should have been my answer. I mean, that relates to what we're talking about, but for sure that would be something, and I can just picture it. I can picture what that would look like in a school. And again, I even have my vision of these little post office boxes. And
well, I would love to have you back.
Thanks.
Hopefully as the year unfolds and you get close to the end of the year, I would love to have a round 2 with you and see how your year is going. You will have by then your first year under your belt. And I would love to maybe narrow our conversation in one of these issues, because I think you have a lot to share. And I'm very passionate about those topics. So
no, you should. We've been here for a long time, and I just realized I was spent so much time on my leadership story. I could have cut that down.
Oh, I love it. I really do love it. And that's what I want. I want other leaders to listen to your story and to see how many other people can resonate with yours.
Well, thanks, Will, and happy birthday.
Thank you. I think I have people waiting for me down there. It has been a pleasure, Vicky.
Same.
Let's do it again for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, I know. Of course, we took all that time, but afterwards I was like, oh my God, I could have said this. Yeah, so I would do it differently next time.